Good evening all, and a very, very warm welcome from a chilly Cape Town this Wednesday evening. Welcome to Moyo Talks, born out of the 8 o'clock club. My name is Mark Bind and I am one of the co-founders of the Moyo platform and one of the partners in the 8 o'clock club. The 8 o'clock club has existed in Cape Town for over 11 years, hosting speakers on a variety of subjects, mostly to do with personal development, spiritual growth, and healing. And with the lockdown, we moved online and started hosting our events online, which coincided with the birth of the Moyo platform, which is a online platform for teaching in a number of fields, also to do with healing, personal development, and spiritual growth. And yeah, tonight it gives us great pleasure to welcome Terry Winship to the platform to share her amazing journey. But before we get to Terry, I'd just like to make a few announcements. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A tab. If you've got any questions for Terry, if I can ask you to place those questions into the Q&A tab, and at the end of her presentation, I'll read those questions to her. At the bottom of the screen, or at the top of some screens, if you're watching on your phone, you'll also find a chat tab. And you are welcome to post feedback or comments or thoughts or observations in the chat tab. And I'm just going to post something there so you can see how that shows up on your device. So yeah, if you want to share something, if you want to just let us know how you're feeling about something, that you've been somewhere where Terry's been, just post that into the chat and everybody can get to see that. Other than that, there's nothing left to announce except to ask you to just take a deep breath in and exhale all your stresses and strains, all your worries and concerns, and take another deep breath to relax the body. And as you exhale, just allow the mind to become quiet and come consciously into the space that we are holding. We might be meeting virtually over the internet, but we still feel the energy of the group. So it would be great if you could just switch off your Facebook for a moment, leave the Twitter arguments for an hour, and just give us your attention for the next while. And you can certainly gain much benefit from listening to Terry this evening. Terry describes herself as having an ache for distant places and a longing for travel. She has restless feet and the world is her oyster. Terry spent 30 years working in IT. She worked in Sweden, Lesotho, China, Switzerland, Ireland, England, Belgium, Panama, and Bloemfontein. She left the corporate world at around the age of 40 to have a child and explore her creative side. She lived in Neo Bethesda and opened a guest house and a restaurant that was very, very successful. She sold that to move to Cape Town, and Terry is now an independent trainer teaching Zoom, MS Office, and professional speaking. During the lockdown, Terry consoles herself by listing the 20 islands she dreams of visiting. And she might also be launching a GoFundMe campaign to fund her next trip. So if you enjoy her talk, I'm sure she can set up a link for us, but you might have to take me along to carry her bags. So with that out the way, Terry, over to you. Thank you very much for being here tonight. I've been looking forward to hearing this story for a long time. I'm glad we finally managed to get a date in the diary for you. Over to you.
Thanks, Mark. I was 50 years old, single with a 9-year-old daughter. I owned my own home. I had an amazing job. My life was good. Yet I wanted more. I found the same old, so boring. I didn't want to do this anymore. I yearned for adventure. I wanted new challenges. I wanted to see and do new things. Have you ever dreamed about traveling? Have you ever thought about chucking it all in and just heading out? During lockdown, have you been thinking of exotic locations and wide open horizons? I'd had this burning desire to travel for so many years, but I'd got caught up in their trap of accumulation and climbing the corporate ladder. I didn't have a rich daddy. I didn't win the lotto. I didn't have huge savings. There were so many reasons why I couldn't travel. Yet, I had learned not to argue for my limitations. And so, I did what any rational 50-year-old would do. I sold absolutely everything I owned. I sold every stick of furniture, the house we were living in, the clothes off our back, until all we were left was 2 backpacks, a pile of money, and a derelict house in the Eastern Cape that nobody would buy. My mother was absolutely horrified. My financial advisor said, "You are fiscally irresponsible." And actually, I can hear you all saying, "Hell, she is brave, but she must be crazy. Who does a gap year at the age of 50? What single mom takes their daughter around the world?" Most of us, when we reach 50, are actually quite happy we're still alive. I looked around at my friends. Some were getting divorced. Some had cancer. Some had even settled for second best and were living quiet, miserable lives. I wanted more than the white picket fence, the beautiful home, and the fact that I had so-called made it. One day I was sitting on my leather lounge suite and I thought, if I sat on this leather lounge suite for an entire year, would it give me more satisfaction than waking up in the Galapagos Islands, than having coffee in New York City, than learning to snorkel in the Galapagos? I looked in the mirror and I thought, could I be a 50-year-old woman who owned nothing? Could I give up the safety of my house, the security of my job, and just head out into the unknown with no safety net, no guarantees, no idea what I would do when I came back? I decided I would be that woman. I would make extraordinary changes in my own life to fulfill my dreams. The more I sold, gave away, threw away, the lighter I got. Haven't you done this in lockdown? Just got rid of years and years of accumulated rubbish. Hasn't it made you feel fabulous? That day finally arrived. Indygo and I embarked on an epic 366-day around the world trip. And let me tell you, traveling with a South African passport is fantastic. The entire South America and Asia, you don't need a visa, you get it at the border and they welcome you with open arms. Don't ever believe that we have a bad passport. And I look at Indygo and I think I did a good thing. She is so at home in the world. She's so ready for new adventures. She's so blasé when she says, I did this in New York or I ate this in Vietnam. She doesn't realize yet how extraordinary it was. And I have never regretted, not even for one single second, selling everything and doing that trip. It absolutely changed my life. In a heartbeat, I would turn the clock back and do it all again. I'm going to start my slideshow to show and share some of our trip with you. In that year, we did 38 flights. We basically visited 10 countries, staying around about 6 weeks in each country. We didn't have an agenda. We stayed as long or as short as we needed to. We visited the US, Canada, and then headed into the unknown, into Ecuador, Peru, Chile, Argentina, then flew right across to the other side of the world to Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Cambodia. We went on trains, buses, boats, bicycles, even sometimes donkeys. We were actually still ready while we were in Cambodia to keep on traveling, but my dad got really sick. And somehow in my head, I thought he was going to die. And so we rushed home, and he's still alive today. We'd bought a round the world ticket, which meant you could have 10 stops, but you had to keep going in the same direction. So we basically followed the sun and made sure we had summer wherever we went. We traveled very light. My luggage for the entire year weighed 12 kilograms and Indygo's weighed 8. We had a handbag, or I had the handbag, I carried it with our passports. I had a small roller bag with electronics like camera, laptop, Kindle, iPad, cosmetics, which always weigh a ton. This was my backpack for the year, and this was Indygo's. And as we traveled 8 months later, we hadn't gained any luggage. If your shirt got dirty, you just bought a new one. And as you can see, by this stage, we were very relaxed travelers. Although I do notice that a little packet of sweeties was jumping onto the plane with us. I had a rule with Indygo. She got pocket money every week, but the simple rule was, if you bought it, you have to carry it. And we were in Peru just before Christmas. And one day walking through the mall, Indygo saw this baby doll that cried like a real baby. And we were far away from home, and she desperately wanted it for a Christmas present. And so my host secretly went to go and buy it, and I hid it away in my backpack, and we landed up on Easter Island for Christmas. Indygo was delighted with this doll, but the first time we did a long distance flight to Santiago, she said to me, "Mom, I can't carry this baby around the world." So I decided to post it to my sister in Johannesburg. And 3 or 4 months later, she got a phone call from the Sandton post office. And the lady said, "Please come and fetch this parcel. This crying baby is breaking my heart." Somehow the battery got turned on. We decided we would always stay with local families. We wouldn't stay in fancy hotels, we wouldn't stay in backpackers, and we actually decided not to stay in tourist spots. Our taxi driver dropped us in Quito, Ecuador, and our host and him had this huge discussion about how they thought our luggage had been stolen. They couldn't believe those small pile of things was going to last us for a year. It was amazing to stay with families. I tried to choose families that had kids, and everywhere we went and everywhere we stayed, they absolutely loved us. They loved Indygo. It was very unusual for most people to have a child traveling. I tried to choose host families that had kids, and we would walk to the schools with them, go to the local markets, sometimes cook dinner together. And it amazed me how we could talk to each other, how we could have conversations. Our Spanish was appalling, their English was appalling. We used Google Translate, and we acted out so many things. Don't ever try and play charades against Indygo and I. But what amazed me, and I found that with all the families in South America and in Asia, there were 3 things we always landed up talking about at the dinner table. Everybody was concerned about their economic future in such an uncertain world. And this was way before COVID. Everybody was complaining about the corruption in their government. Didn't matter which country we were in. And everybody always wanted a good education and a better life for their own children. Sometimes we hit a luck and stayed in actually quite nice places. We stayed in Lima in Peru, and this guy was a great traveler, and he always invited travelers to stay with him. And we'd have these amazing conversations around the dinner table and learn all sorts of tips and tricks. In Cusco, we stayed in the equivalent of a shack. It had no hot water. And at night when it rained, we just put all our luggage on our bed and the rain just swept through the room and everyone thought it was normal. We only had one night when we stayed, in fact, one weekend. We stayed in the Hard Rock Hotel when Indygo turned 10. This was her choice. And I remember so vividly when we got into the hotel and she had the shower and she said to me, "Mom, I can't believe we even have hot water." And an amazing lesson to learn how many people around the world live so differently from us. I traveled light. I had one pair of pants, one pair of shorts and a skirt and a couple of tops. They were all versions of pink and purple, because that's a bit how I roll. And this idea of having a capsule wardrobe. When you wake up in the morning, there are absolutely no decisions to take about what to wear. Whatever you washed last night in the shower, and if it's clean, you put it on. And I have to admit that I wore a pair of purple Crocs for the entire year. And before you think that's too much of a fashion disaster, they at least were the sandal ones. One day we were in Disney. We started in Disney. 9-year-old dream, and Indygo so wanted to go. And I was talking to the lady in the queue for the Harry Potter ride, which took us 2 hours. And she loved my outfit. And when I explained to her that I only actually had 3 outfits for the whole year, she was astonished. In the land of plenty, this was news. And she soon told everybody in the row, and everybody was questioning me. And I found a strange thing happened. If I have to go to Cavendish to buy a white t-shirt, Woolworths might have a choice of 2 or 3. Edgar's might have 1 or 2. But if you go into Walmart, you have a choice of like 200 t-shirts. And I found I became absolutely paralyzed when there was so much choice. And I just never bought anything in America. Did I have any issues about traveling so light? Well, I thought I was really clever one day, and we were going to Machu Picchu, which was high in the mountains and cold. And so to save like 50 grams of weight, I gave away my costume. We actually spent 10 days at Machu Picchu, staying in Agua Calientes, the little village at the bottom. It made me quite sad to see how many people would arrive on the train, rush up to Machu Picchu and leave the same day. Because we traveled slow, we were here for 10 days, and we discovered a couple of kilometers in the jungle, there were these amazing natural hot pools, but I didn't have a costume. Some enterprising Peruvian had bought some costumes, and the thought of hiring a costume that was damp, that 400 people had worn before me, absolutely made me chill. But I had a choice. Could I put on that damp costume, or could I miss the adventure? Absolutely, I wanted to swim in those pools. Here you can see Indygo walking along the path into the jungle to the hot water pools. I took this photograph sitting inside the pool. You could just see these beautiful mountains, this thick jungle, these bizarre statues, and even in the background, some of the locals. An experience definitely not to be missed. And the longer we traveled, the less we gave up our Western manners, and very soon we're living just like the locals, showering in public, eating at the markets, wearing the absolute clothes that we could buy the cheapest. It's such a life lesson to learn that you don't need all this stuff to make you happy. Machu Picchu, one of the most beautiful, mysterious, magical places in the world. But this is a place that is getting overrun with tourists. Before we got there, they had no limit on the tourists. When we were there, they were allowing 2,500 people a day up to Machu Picchu. And every person who goes up there, you do a tiny bit of damage. You step on a blade of grass, you brush against a wall, you knock a stone over, and the accumulated damage from so many people is absolutely massive. I just read on the internet today, they've been closed because of COVID and have just opened on the 1st of August and are only allowing 600 people a day. And I really do hope that this allows this to recover. Because we were doing slow travel, we stayed here for 10 days. And we went up on the first bus in the morning, walked right up to the moon gate. It is completely breathless up there. And we watched the sunrise. And another time we went in the afternoon and we watched the sunset. And once, just for fun, we went for a picnic. If you have ever been to Machu Picchu, you will know that it is terrifying, eye-poppingly terrifying to go up on the bus. This is the road. It virtually is in a cliff with the hugest hairpin bends you've ever seen. It's a dirt road and these people drive like absolute maniacs. I actually, every time we went up or down, I just sat with my eyes closed. It was terrifying, but really worth it once you got to the top. One thing that happened is there are signs everywhere saying, do not bring plastic water bottles. But of course, nobody obeys the rules. And the one day when we went up for a picnic, this was the amount of plastic they had collected in one day. It had to go down on that bus, that terrifying bus to Aguas Caliente. There are no roads there. There's no industry there. So it had to get put on a train and be sent off to somewhere in Peru. Absolute mountains of rubbish that just overwhelmed the local communities. Indygo left Komiki Primary when she was in the middle of grade 3. And so from time to time, she made a little video to send home to them to watch. And then they occasionally would send us a video back.
Hi guys, I'm standing in the middle of the lost city of the Incas. It's called Machu Picchu. These people lived here like 700 years ago, and then one day they just left, the scientists think, and now the like city's gone into ruins, and it's cool. Okay, miss you guys. Happy Christmas from Pop. Indy. Bye.
I don't know if you think that Indygo looks quite ill in this video, but we both got such bad altitude sickness and had headaches for days on end. It really isn't a myth, this altitude sickness. A place I'd always wanted to go to was the Galapagos Islands. We were absolutely privileged to be able to spend 3 weeks on the island. We didn't come on a cruise ship. And we stayed in somebody's back room. But amazing experience to be on the island, actually start to meet the locals and buzz around everywhere on our bicycles. And every 2 or 3 days, we would take a trip to the other islands and see what was happening. Such an alien landscape. Coming from the African savanna, this volcanic rock and these strange plants, it just fascinated me endlessly. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And the wildlife is just ignores humans. They don't even get afraid from you. There were iguanas everywhere you looked, hundreds of thousands of iguanas. They always climbed on top of each other. But the weirdest thing is they all swim. And the first time we were swimming in the sea and this 2-meter iguana cruised past us, we absolutely nearly had a heart attack. The Galapagos Islands get about 150,000 visits annually. This is 6 times their population. And what happens is people come in big cruise ships, and then they all land on the island at 10 o'clock in the morning. And it amazes me. They demand hamburgers, they demand pizzas, they want water everywhere. They want everything to be like home, and they don't want to try any stuff. And I could feel at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when they went back to their big cruise ship, how the whole island just gave a sigh of relief. Of course, Galapagos is famous for the giant tortoises, and they really are huge. What absolutely distressed me is when I found out that not a single tortoise is born in the wild in the Galapagos anymore. Why? The rats are coming off the tourist ships and eating every single egg. And even though the tourist ships are out at sea, they can't dock in the harbors, these rats swim. And so now what happens is during breeding season, there is a race between the locals and the rats. The locals try and collect as many eggs as they can to put them in incubators. And when the tortoises are big enough, they distribute them around the island. It's such a moral dilemma when you travel. You go to Galapagos to see the tortoises, but your very presence is actually the thing that is causing the tortoises to diminish. So sad and so hard to work out what is the right thing to do. Oh my absolute favorite place in the world, Rapa Nui, Easter Island. It's that magical, mystical island that has all those giant heads, the moai, absolutely encircling the island. Easter Island is such a fragile environment. It gets around 100,000 visitors a year, and it's tiny, 163 square kilometers. These heads or statues are the ancestors. They're called moai, and they've been carved out of volcanic rock about 5 or 6 or 7 k's in the interior and then brought down to the coast. They've been shut down during COVID. And what was interesting is that about 100 tourists got stuck on the island and soon started running out of money. But the locals made sure that they always had food. So many legends, so many stories about Easter Island. They started building the statues or carving them in about the 13th century until about the 16th century. And then they stopped abruptly. Here is a statue getting carved out of the mountain that was left unfinished. What happened? A lot of people believe it was an ecological disaster. They'd cut down the very last tree and then could no longer roll the statues down. They couldn't make boats, they couldn't fish. Also, the Europeans had arrived and actually decimated the population with all the diseases they were carrying. And the Peruvians used to come and do slave raids and steal the people. So once on the Easter Island, they called it the bad times. This is volcanic soil, not much grows there. They couldn't fish because they no longer had boats. And so the families started fighting against each other. There are all sorts of stories about cannibalism. But the one thing they did was go and knock each other's statues over. And then in 1960, the biggest earthquake ever registered happened off Chile, and a tsunami swept over the island and knocked over the rest of the statues. This particular moai is called the traveling moai. After the tsunami, a big crane company in Japan came to the island and helped them lift up. These things weigh several tons. Some of them are 14 meters high. And they took a moai back to Japan. And after much correspondence, he was returned home and is now called the traveling moai. If you are an armchair activist, there is a moai living in the British museums. And if you're like me, I send them letters once or twice a year telling them to please send him home. The British in the 18th century arrived on the island and they dumped a whole bunch of horses because they couldn't feed them and they didn't have enough water. It's such a surreal experience. Everywhere you go on the island, you see herds of wild horses. These are all moai that have been fully carved, but whenever the bad times happened, they weren't able to move down to their position at the sea. And over the years, the silt and the wind and everything has just covered them up. The few they've actually dug out are fully formed. The moai always, their head is a third of the size of their body. There are so many stories. It's so fascinating. And another thing about Easter Island is it is crisscrossed with lava tunnels, When the lava flows down, the outside of the tunnel hardens and the inside keeps continuing to flow. All these secret magical hiding places there, and so much mystery and mystique and stories. But Easter Island is facing another ecological disaster. There is no fresh water, no source, no springs, no water on the island. It is volcanic. So when it rains, it just pours through those porous rocks into the sea, except for the 3 volcanic craters where it has actually managed to catch rainwater. But as the sea levels are rising and as this crater wall is starting to erode, one day all this precious water is going to flow into the sea, and then they will face another disaster. These moai are huge. This particular guy here is 3 stories high. They all stand with their backs to the sea and they stare sightlessly inland. They are brooding. You're absolutely overwhelmed when you stand in front of them. They all used to have these hats, which were made of different rocks. But in the bad times when they were knocked over, and then with the tsunami, very, very few of them have got hats left anymore. They also used to have white eyes made from shells, and none of them have got that anymore. This place fascinated me endlessly. It was so tiny, and I was just intrigued by all the things that had happened there. I would go back here in a flash. One place that got tourism right is Tanquil Island in Lake Titicaca. When we visited there, this is the highest lake in the world. They were only allowing tour boats with 10 people on at a time. And the next tour could only arrive on the island when the last one had left. Because at one stage they got overrun by tourism and they decided to really, really control it. It's an unusual island. Here on the island, all the men do the knitting and the women work in the fields. And they have this unusual arrangement around marriages. If you want to marry somebody, the whole island gets together and they vote to decide if you're going to make a good couple or not. And then every 3 years, they redecide if your marriage is working or if you should move on. It's one of my favorite photographs. It was such a special human moment, this. This old guy was sitting in the sun knitting, the finest knitting you've ever seen. And Indygo sat next to him, and we just had a whole expression of warmth and love, which you don't get very often. Unos Reed Islands, absolutely fascinating. These people used to escape from the marauding warriors and build these islands out of reeds, and every day they'll just put another layer on. You can see their houses, they just lift them up and put a layer of reeds on underneath. But sadly, they've absolutely succumbed to too many visitors. They no longer live on the island with their traditional lives. In fact, they come from the city on the boat with you and then change on the island. So it's become a bit of a parody, but it just gives you an insight into how they used to live. We had decided that we would spend our money on experiences and not on things. And it amazed me when you were in the market in Peru, if you looked closely, the stuff was made in China. And you buy something and 3 months later you chuck it away. So we went to every single cultural, natural history museum, every art museum in every city, country, and town we went to. This is the Natural History Museum in New York City, where McDonald's donates cow's eyes to the museum. Indygo was absolutely delighted to dissect a cow's eye and learn how sight worked. I have to admit, I moved on quite quickly. Museums all over the world are so interactive. This is a museum of the human body where you climb through the heart and crawl through the stomach and look at how the lungs work. Indygo did no schooling, so this was an amazing way to learn stuff. We tried to act and be locals wherever we were. So in New York City, we went rollerblading and felt like we were really cool and had been living in the city for years. And of course, if you're in Thailand, you have to hire that motorbike to zoom around town. And do you notice we hired the pink one to match our outfits? I absolutely loved hiking on the glacier. We were in El Califate in Argentina. What an amazing experience. And one of the things I never realized is actually that the color of the snow is honestly, it's blue. And you have to hike and be careful because sometimes these holes just appear in front of you. And so weird, we were hot, it was in the summer, and yet we were hiking on snow and ice. A beautiful experience. Once again, we stayed at El Califate outside the town, and one day we went for a picnic at the glacier. I have never realized how much noise a glacier makes. They groan and they creak, and every so often a piece of ice breaks off. It sounds like a gunshot. It hits the water and it makes a huge splash. There's nothing more amazing than having a picnic in front of a natural phenomenon. I, of course, drank whiskey at 9 o'clock one morning. We'd gone out on a boat and we had got ice off one of the icebergs that was floating loose. I drank whiskey with ice that was 800 or 900 years old, the freshest, tastiest water you've ever had. And what a great day to start drinking whiskey at 9 o'clock in the morning. Our policy of staying outside of towns always gave us such great experiences. Here is Indygo. On Easter Island, we decided not to stay in the tiny only village there is on Easter Island, but we stayed on a farm. And the farmer taught her how to ride his four-wheeler, even with the gears. She spent so many happy hours just zooming round and round and round the island. We went on courses everywhere. We went on a jewelry making course, a batik course. I even went on a course on how to make a Rubik's Cube. But I absolutely loved cooking courses. It's not that you'll ever make this food when you come home because it's so local. But we had gone up the Mekong Delta in a boat and stopped to make rice paper in this lady's house. What a great experience. And it started in me a love for cooking, which I still have today. But you have to remember that the markets are so different to ours. Going to buy a chicken that is slaughtered in front of you and bleeds everywhere is very different from going to Woolworths. But what a good lesson for us both to learn, to actually see where our food comes from. I actually honestly thought Indygo was never going to eat chicken in her life again. The markets, they actually upset our Western sensibilities. They are dirty, they smell, they sell the most disgusting things. But the more we traveled and the more we stayed with locals and we started to understand they don't have refrigerators in their houses. Some of the places we stayed in didn't even have electricity. And they are poor and they don't waste a single part of the animal. So the more markets we went to and we could get over our Western squeamishness, we actually started to see how efficient they were. But I think I'll take a pass on buffalo lip stew for tonight. Oh, we had such fun one day. We went on a chocolate making course. We roasted them, we made the tea, we tempered the chocolate, we tasted all day long. It was such fun. But the best part of the experience this was in Peru, where guinea pig are their national dish. And while I'm quite an adventurous eater, I could just not bring myself to eat a guinea pig. They look like pets to me. And when you drive around Peru, like we see in Africa, there are chickens everywhere. Well, in Peru, there are guinea pigs everywhere. But on this course, they made a drink from guinea pig milk. What a bizarre experience to milk a tiny guinea pig to get a thimble full of milk. One sip and it was done. On the Mekong Delta, we went fishing one day and we happened to catch a fish, which the fisherman deep fried in a pot of oil and then gave us on a stick. You don't want to be rude to your hosts. And so with chopsticks. He didn't even clean the scales off or take the stomach out. He just fried it. And I managed to enjoy some meat from the side. And in the end, it was absolutely delicious. Although I don't think Indygo ate much that day. At a market in Vietnam, we found snake wine. 20 different snakes in this jar of wine. And the guy told me, if I drink this, I'll never have an illness in my life again. Hey, I was up for it, drank a glass of this wine, and then had the disgusting experience of having snake scales stuck in my mouth. Never again. Indygo, we went paragliding off the cliffs of Lima. Indygo has just landed. She was an amazing traveler, up for every single adventure. Look at that joy on her face when she had just flown around through the city. But traveling as two women, I had to always balance caution with adventure. And this was the first time Indygo flew and then I flew afterwards. And it was the first time I actually had my heart in my mouth. I thought, I've left my 9-year-old daughter alone on the ground with strangers in a country where we know nobody, in a place where we can't speak the language. Can't tell you how relieved I was when we landed and she was still waiting there. We had this rule when we traveled. Indygo always had to be within 3 meters of me. We spent 24/7 together and luckily got on so well. But I did build some safety things in. Every morning when we'd leave, we'd get the business card from the host, or they would write a letter in Spanish explaining their name, their address, where they lived. So if for any bizarre reason we got separated, Indygo could at least get back to the host house. And they also had my sister's number in case I died suddenly, but we never had a single problem, not once in our 366 days of travel. So not all the experiences were great. We were in Penang in Thailand and made friends with a Chinese healer called Jet Li. And he persuaded us to do Chinese cupping. This is when they light a match in a glass jar and then stick it on your skin so it forms a vacuum and it sucks your skin into that. It gives you these impressive round black bruises, which is what Indygo wanted, but it's painful. You can just imagine all your skin getting sucked up there. She cried through the entire experience, but he wouldn't stop. And so there are some things you only actually try once. In Penang, we went for Tai Chi lessons at 4 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock in the morning. And every time it was at a different venue, in the forest, at the beach, near a river. And every afternoon we did Qigong from 4 o'clock until 6 o'clock. But imagine our shock when we flew halfway around the world and the instructor was a guy from Zimbabwe. Go figure. So while we did very many cultural things, we also did bizarre things. This is the gum wall in Seattle. And for some strange reason, everyone gets big wads of chewing gum, chews it, and sticks it on the wall. Who knows why? But we did all sorts of fun and interesting things. Cambodia, what a place, where these temples have been deserted for thousands of years, and the trees actually look like living things that have just engulfed them. But sometimes you have beautiful moments. We were blessed by a Buddhist monk, and it was such a peaceful moment in our lives of traveling. And you get to learn while you're traveling that there are actually hundreds and hundreds of gods, and there's not just one God that fits all. Some days we were very active, and other days like this, we drifted down the Tam Coc River in Vietnam. Beautiful cliffs and rice fields. It feels sometimes like you're in a movie. And other days we were active. We hired a tandem and we cycled over the San Francisco Bridge. Oh my goodness, there's a lot of uphill to get there. And at one point, we actually pushed that tandem bike. But at the other end, you had a 5-kilometer downhill run to Salsa. What a fun day. We did a deep Amazon trip. We flew in a small plane, and then we went in this river ferry. The Amazon is so wide, you can barely see the sides where the land starts. Then we went down a tributary in a smaller boat, a motorboat. Then we even got into a dugout canoe, and we landed at this place that had no electricity. Not a soul could speak English. There's absolutely no way of communicating with the outside world. And that heat is ferocious. And the tarantulas are bigger than your head. I'm glad I've done it, and I don't think I'll go again in a hurry. But one day, we persuaded our guide to take us fishing. The highlight of Indygo's life was when she caught a piranha. You cannot believe how small they are and how big their teeth are. We saw all sorts of animals. We met this guy snorkeling in the Galapagos. He's called a blue-footed booby. Just made me smile when I saw and met all these animals all over the world. Indygo on the Galapagos spent hours and hours and hours swimming. And one day her and a pelican just had this long chat together. It was such a moving moment, and it actually was on the day of my 50th birthday. We'd walked down to this island to have a picnic. In Vietnam, we went to the Gucci tunnels. Indygo at 9 years old could barely fit down these tunnels where the adults had hidden during the war. The effects of the war are still seen all over the country. Quite a sobering thing to look at. Oh my goodness. We went on a Chinese junk in Halong Bay, where these limestone mountains just rise out of the water. For 3 days, we just floated around looking at the most beautiful sights. Our cabin had a window from the floor right up to the roof, and you could just lie in bed and see beauty everywhere you went. One of my favorite trips was we did a cross Andes in this luxurious train where they served you 5-course meals. It felt like, a bit like an Agatha Christie novel. So desolated up there. There are no roads. There's hardly any people. It's cold, but it is absolutely beautiful. What fascinated me is when you did go through a village, their market was on the railway line. They didn't take their stuff away. The train just rode over it, and then they carried on with their days. So very different from our lives. But I guess, like all things, it had to come to an end. We had an absolute amazing, magical year together, and we are still close all these years after traveling. So I hear you ask, what did you do when you came back? I didn't have the corporate job anymore, didn't have the house in Komiki. Well, what I did have was the derelict building in New Bethesda. It had no running water. It didn't have a single toilet or bathroom. It had no kitchen. And as you can see, when I mean derelict, I wasn't joking. So because I had nowhere else to go, we spent a year fixing up this property. Every single day we would go in the garden and we would pick up broken tin, barbed wire, broken glass. We carried tons and tons and tons of rubbish away. And even though I had no experience in hospitality, I decided to open a coffee shop. There were 10 restaurants in New Bethesda at that stage with a population only of 78 people. But I know that good coffee anywhere around the world is needed. This was my lounge and dining room, very rustic, and we opened a little shop selling stuff made in the Karoo. And even though I had no experience, I'd never cooked for people before, this thing morphed and it became a place for breakfast and then for lunch and then for tea and then for dinner. I taught myself everything on the internet. This was such an adventure again. The closest town was Graaff-Reinet, a 100-kilometer round trip. There are no delis or specialized food there. So I had to learn to make absolutely everything from jam to ice cream to oxtail. And we had this tradition on a Sunday called Slow Sundays at the Ibis. We could take 20 people and we'd serve a 5-course meal. You had to get there at 12 and we served the last cup of coffee at 4 o'clock. But we were booked for weeks in advance. And sometimes people would phone me from Johannesburg and say, we're going to drive through the night. please make sure you've got your 6-hour oxtail ready for us. It was a fantastic 3 years. We got so many comments. We met so many travelers. It was such a happy time of our lives. Indygo wasn't at school. I have to admit she missed 3 years of school. But she knew how to make salads. She knew how to make milkshakes. She knew how the credit card machine worked. She could take people around the village. She could take them to her room. But it's another way of traveling. You've been in hospitality because you meet travelers from everywhere. We won award after award after award. But the one that made me the most happy was the Sanlam Top Destination Award in 2017. We came second in the entire country in the bed and breakfast category. Can you imagine this dusty 3-bedroom little guest house stuck in the Karoo beat thousands of other establishments to come second? But one day I looked at Indygo. She wasn't at school. There were no kids her own age. She only spent time with adults. And I thought, you know, I need to come back to Cape Town where there's bright lights and big cities, and she can do teenage stuff. And because I'd done it before, I did it again. We sold the Ibis as a going concern and left to move to Cape Town with just the clothes on our back again. And where am I now? I own a home in Kenilworth. Indygo was at a private school until COVID happened. I'm a professional speaker, an IT trainer. I've got my own catering company. My life couldn't be better. But there is a part of me that just wants to pack it all up and go on another adventure. We got such an unexpected gift in lockdown. Indygo started on an online school. So we are no longer anchored physically to a place or a routine. Oh, this opens up so many possibilities. What about a stint on St. Helena Island? I've always wanted to live on an ashram. And I wonder, could we walk the length of the Great Wall of China? And Indygo is even worse than me. She's always saying, Mom, where are we going to go to next? That year of travel changed my life. I came back a different person. And what I learned to travel lightly through life. I need so much less stuff than I could ever imagine. Well, except for handbags and champagne, those are essential items. But I learned how little I need to be happy. I'd seen the beauty of the world and seen how fragile all these beautiful places are. So I intentionally and consciously make decisions now when I buy stuff that will help the planet. And I learned over and over again that experiences give you lasting happiness, way more than the fleeting happiness that you get from things. I used to have such a fear of loss, of losing my job, of losing my house, of losing my stuff. But in the process of giving everything up, I released myself. I broke that bondage of fear and I have reaped enormous benefits. I wish I could gift you all a year of travel, of growth, of learning, of wonder. Use your fear. You will be amazed at what it does. And in the words of Mary Oliver, my favorite poet, I ask you, what is it that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Wow, thank you, Terry. Sure, it's going to be a long wait until the airline industry is open.
Mark, I can't hear you.
Yeah, are you sure? Okay, can you hear me now? It's a long wait until the airline industry opens because there's a lot of inspiration to do some traveling there.
I think it's my side, actually.
Terry, maybe
That's my
check
side.
your. Okay, great. Okay, so we do have quite a few questions
All right,
that
hit
we'll
me.
get through. There are quite a few questions asking about finding host families. How did you find your host families in different countries?
So the internet is your answer to everything. When we went to Ecuador, we went to Spanish school. And luckily I went to the kids' Spanish school because Indygo learned Spanish so much faster than me. But the Spanish school, we emailed them and we explained we wanted to, and they had a list of families. And every country we went to, there would be homestays or farm stays or family stays. I think almost that Airbnb was trying to do the same thing, but it was before those days. But honestly, if you've got an internet connection, you can find anything. And we never struggled ever to find accommodation.
Great. Thanks, Terry. The next question, did you ever feel unsafe in South America?
So no, not once, but we also traveled carefully. We were going to go to Mexico and then they had started having all drug wars. And so we thought we'll skip it and go somewhere else. But we always made sure that we arrived in the daytime. And we always made sure that our host family was fetching us. And we always stayed with locals who really, really looked after you. And we went with them everywhere. So, and also we hardly ever went out at night because when you're traveling with a 9-year-old, you're not exactly going to go to the bar and the disco every night. So it was quite a different way of traveling. And also 2 women traveling are not threatening. So people opened so many doors and were so welcoming. But I read a lot and I researched. So we didn't go on those long bus trips because that's when most of the hijackings and stuff happened. So we were careful travelers, but it didn't really stop us doing anything.
Great. Thanks, Terry. What was Indygo's highlight of the trip?
Oh, I think catching a piranha. Actually, in truth, I think it was when we were in New York City and she so desperately wanted to go to a laundromat. And she begged me every day. So one day we took all our clothes down, she got the money and she put it in and we watched the laundry go round and round. And she always talks about that experience. Not that she does the washing at home these days.
Yeah, sometimes it's the mundane where you can find your joy.
Mm-hmm.
Another question about Indygo. So about the schooling. Now you did a lot of courses and a lot of interesting things that is very educational. So you kind of answered that already, but what happened when you got back here and sort of started to go back into the school system? What happened then?
So luckily, when we moved from New Bethesda to Cape Town and she had this huge gap in her school year, she went to Cedar House, which is a private school down the road, and they did all sorts of tricky things and caught it up. But honestly, missing 4 years of school made absolutely zero difference. She's passing all her exams, getting 70s and 80s. And so quite honestly, I think she learned more obviously in that year. And then the 3 years in New Bethesda learned different skills. But no, it made no difference to her schooling.
Okay, awesome. Then if you could choose a place to live, where would it be and why?
Okay, I lost my heart to Easter Island. It in fact reminded me so much of New Bethesda. It's a tiny, isolated little place with dusty roads and everybody knows everybody. I would love to go there and do something. But in fact, they don't allow any foreigners to open a business or to own land. So that will just have to be an idle dream. But oh, I would go back there at the drop of a hat.
Okay, so slightly related to this, a question from Michelle. What city or town would you go back to first, assuming there isn't a city or a town on the Easter Islands?
No, definitely not. So one of the places we went to was Valparaiso in Chile. And it's a rough port city. And we just went to see Pablo Neruda's grave. And when we got there, the museum was closed. And so we thought we'll hang around until the strike stops. And we landed up staying there for 3 weeks. It was so fascinating. There was so much graffiti and so many weird things. And we just spent hours walking up and down the city, and it's really rough and gritty, and I found it also colorful and amazing and so South American. Yeah, frontier city, I think.
Okay, nice one. Now the question lots of people are asking, money. How did you budget? How much money did it cost? What did it cost?
So this is how it worked. We bought a round the world ticket, and I'm talking a couple of years ago, that cost 92,000 Rand for both Indygo and I, which actually is a little because it gave us 10 stops. We just had to keep going in the same direction. And then we had 450,000 Rand left, which worked out to be about 1,200 Rand a day. So we did this really primitive budget. Every month, at the end of the month, I would take a 12th of the money and put it into the local currency. Then I would divide it by the number of days, and that's how much money we had to spend. And if we want, and that was for food, for accommodation, for experiences, for local travel. So if we wanted to do something that cost more, we would have some down days. We would just hang around or go for a walk, because you can't just keep go. We would catch up and read books and write emails and Skype the family. But effectively, we traveled very cheap. And that's why we stayed with local families, but it also made all the difference to our trip. It's what turned it into an extraordinary trip. So, yeah.
Okay. Did you ever lose your passports or anything else valuable?
No. But what we did one day was actually when we just got into New York City, and I had one of those traveling safes that you can loop around the bed or something. And as I was locking it, I somehow spun the wheel and I couldn't unlock my own stuff. And so we were walking around thinking, oh, what the hell are we going to do? And there was a building site across the road. And I went to speak to the guy who came with his big wrench cutty thing, and he just broke through all my security in 1 second. But I always carried my handbag across. I mean, we were very safety conscious. And also because we stayed with locals, we didn't tend to get ripped off like tourists do all the time, because they always protect you from that stuff.
Yeah. Okay, great. Did you have any health insurance or travel insurance?
Yes, we did. We took out, in fact, so many countries won't let you actually go in unless you've got travel insurance that will repatriate you home if you're sick. So we managed to find quite a good deal before we left that covered us for the whole 12 months that we traveled. And actually, when we were in Malaysia doing Tai Chi with a different lady, I actually cracked my ankle and cracked a bone in my ankle. And we landed up going to the local hospital, and then I limped around because I refused to come home just for a cracked ankle. But we really didn't have any issues. Indygo was always sick the first day we went to any country. Even though we boiled the water or whatever, she was always sick and then recovered the next day and everything was fine. So, but yeah, we did certainly have insurance.
And she still refused to drink the snake wine.
Actually, she did drink it. I wasn't going to tell you that my 9-year-old daughter was drinking alcohol, but she drank it.
So I want to know is, have you ever been sick since drinking that snake wine?
Well, I haven't got corona, so perhaps it worked.
Well, maybe we should tell Donald Trump that snake wine works for
Oh,
corona.
God. There won't be a snake alive in the world then.
So somebody's asking who you got your health insurance from.
It was through a travel agent, and it was called, I think it was called Euro Assist, actually. I had to do quite a lot of research on the internet and phoning around before someone would do such a long one, because it was an exceptional amount of time. But actually, because it was such a long period of time, it was actually relatively cheap in the end. If they do really want to know, I will go back and look at my records, but Euro Assist comes to mind.
Okay. Any idea what that cost?
Not at the moment. God.
No.
So my brain is filled with so many exciting things. I don't think of boring things like money.
Yes. But Anonymous is assuming or asking if it was about 500,000 for the two of you for the year.
Yeah, so it was the 450 budget and the 92 for the tickets. So yeah, just over R500,000 for a year. Yeah.
Louise would like to know if you are still in contact with any of the host families from that year.
Absolutely. There are so many people. And in fact, I can't actually see who the participants are. But last time I did a talk, there were people who joined in from Argentina and all over the place. So I email, and Facebook makes it so easy. And so many of the people that I traveled with, I don't know what it is, but you make an instant bond with people. And some of them just drifted away and didn't happen. And others, we're always making plans to go and visit them or for them to come and visit us. When we were on the train in Peru, we hadn't spoken or heard English for weeks. And there was a British couple on the train, and we just spoke. They'd only spoken to each other for months. We had only spoken to each other for months. We spoke so much on that train, but all of us were completely hoarse. And then we kept on bumping into them all over South America. They were doing a similar trip. Yeah, so yeah, I do. Lots of people I email.
Okay, awesome. I think Andre is looking for a new pair of shoes. He wants to know what happened to the Crocs.
Oh my goodness. So I wore this pair of purple Crocs all around the world. And we came back and we went to Scarborough one day and we went for a walk, and I left them on the boardwalk, and I came back and someone stole my Crocs and they were worn out. And I was like, well, I gift it to you. I hope it takes you around the world as well. How bizarre is that?
Well, welcome home.
Yeah.
Okay, last question, and then we'll start wrapping things up. What advice would you give a single person just over 40 wanting to travel alone on a trip like that? And I think that is from Louise.
I would say, just like the Nike ad, just do it. Absolutely. There are hundreds of people who travel by themselves. You meet solo travelers everywhere. And especially if you do the backpacking route, which at 40 is perfect to do, you meet travelers and you travel with them for a while. I traveled solo before I went with Indygo, and it's such a liberating thing to do. But if you're careful and you plan it and you make sure you don't put yourself in dangerous situations and you don't carry anyone's luggage on the plane, and you make sure you research the places, you will find traveling by yourself is absolutely amazing. And I would suggest if you could do it, you should do it as soon as lockdown is over.
Great. Thank you so much, Terry. Thank you for your time and your passion and your stories this evening, and the photographs were amazing.
Absolutely.
And yeah, it looks like everybody's had an amazing time. I'm just watching the comments coming in here. Write a book. They love your stories. Put it into a screenplay. Lots of comments coming in there. So thank you very much. It's really been thoroughly enjoyable.
Thanks,
For
Mark,
everybody
for
else
me.
who is interested, next week we are hosting Angeli Marcon and Melvin Chisholm Baloyi. Angie Lee is a qualified traditional healer, a sound therapist, and an energy healer, and is going to be talking to us about understanding shadow work, the ego, delving into plant medicine, the use and misuse of various plants such as ayahuasca, San Pedro, and DMT. She's going to be talking about integration of these processes and why it's so vital in the Western world. So you can understand shadow work of the self and the collective shadow work, understand how to step into your true self with your own gifts. You can gain understanding on plant medicine such as ayahuasca and San Pedro. You can learn what integration means and discover what it means to be a modern day medicine woman. So that is next week, Wednesday at 8 o'clock with Angeli Marcon. And if you're interested in that, please do join us. As for this evening's talk, we'll be sharing the recording from this talk tomorrow via email. So if you're interested in watching it again or sharing it with a friend, we'll share the recording tomorrow. So thank you to the audience for being here. It's been a fun event. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And Terry, thank you very much. Thank you for your time and your passion and for sharing your stories with us. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you on the road.